Coming up on Curious Minds, we will dig into the theology or lack thereof of comedian and talk show host Bill Maher. Hello and welcome to another Curious Minds podcast. This is Evan Van Sickle, late at night here at the Christian Student Center. Hope you had a great 3-day Labor Day weekend. I know it's been fairly busy around here. Didn't really get to get out of town. I got a few miles out of town. Got to see some of the petroglyphs this weekend, or the volcano side. So that was nice. Decent weather. Hot, but maybe not quite as hot as it's been, which it's a little relieving when the temperature drops 4 degrees, isn't it? Can't wait for fall. We are now into September, which means fall is somewhat upon us. A couple weeks into the school year here at the University of New Mexico. We've been setting up the Q&A table, and we've had some intriguing questions, some good interactions take place, and just some curious people stop by. And I guess the main question we've got multiple times is actually, what denomination are you guys? What church is this a part of? Alright, fair question, but my answer I think catches them a little off guard. If you're talking to me about what denomination I'm from, well, sit down and get comfortable, because I grew up Lutheran, and we started going to Calvary Chapel, went Pentecostal, Assemblies of God for a little while, back to Calvary Chapel. It's like, gosh, I don't know, a lot of churches seem to worship God in a good way. Went off to Tennessee, went to an inter-denominational college and a non-denominational church, got into a ministry that's supported by the Churches of Christ. And so when people bring up the idea that, well, these denominations, they all think they have the exclusive rights to truth. No, denominations exist for people's tastes, for traditions, and for a strategy for governing and supporting worldwide endeavors. Rarely do I ever hear someone say, yes, I'm in the church that has exclusive rights to the truth. How lucky am I? And that's not what I saw by spending time in different poles of the Christian spectrum. So interesting that people want to know. I think they just want to know where we're coming from, more or less, because we don't really put that out there on the sign. They want to know, are we getting Christian answer from a Mormon here? Are we getting a Christian answer from a Jehovah's Witness? They would do something like this. Are we getting it from a Catholic? They would do something like this too. What kind of group is this? So I don't mind the question, but hopefully there's not that follow-up idea with, oh, you're not my denomination, I shouldn't talk to you. Come on. Let's celebrate a little more unity in the body of Christ than questioning whether we should be involved with denominations that stretch outside our own upbringing. Paul had something to say about that, didn't he? You say you're of Paul, and another guy says he's of Apollos. Come on, isn't it just about Jesus? Yes. When we have that as our rallying cry, I think a beautiful thing happens within the Christian body. So I hope to promote that, as well as promote healthy Christian dialogue, Christian apologetics, Christian philosophy, and sound biblical teaching to those that have questions. Let me move into something that I engaged with a little bit over the weekend. I picked up Bill Maher's movie Religulous, and in a way I regret picking it up. I did not closely look at the content of the movie before getting it, and that is very unlike me. I do not recommend that anybody pick up this movie. It is R-rated, has some very questionable material, and beyond questionable material. If you want to figure out what the film is, like I say, I suggest that you do not watch the film. You can go online and see a full transcript of it. So a better option, a more family-friendly option, just look at the transcript of the film. So this is Bill Maher. He's a comedian, basically. He's been a comedian for probably 35 plus years. So he understands what it takes to win an audience, to sell shows, to get a laugh, and he understands what it takes to look good in front of his audience. He's done a lot of comedy that is kind of mock news, who's made his living off of quick-witted, snide, off-color, offensive, and entertaining content. He knows how to play to his audiences. He's used that platform to insult religion. He admits that he's never really set out to disprove God, although I think he would fight for such a cause. But in winning so many people over through sketch comedy, mockumentary comedy, and stand-up comedy, he has audiences wrapped around his finger. And I just listened to a clip where he makes some insulting comment toward Christianity, and the crowd goes wild. Now, you could probably bring the Pope in front of that same audience, and the crowd will go wild just based on Bill Maher's suggestion. So he knows that he has people wrapped around his finger, which means he can be quick-witted and insulting, and people will consider that evidence for the truth of what he says. So what does he really prove, and what does his approach actually accomplish? Well, I'm going to bring up particular quotes and particular claims in a few parts of the film. So what's Bill Maher's objective in this film? Is it to disprove Christianity? Well, not in the traditional way. But it's to make religion, especially forms of Christianity, look stupid, which will make the position of the non-religious or the atheist look smart and powerful. And yes, he does take on Islam as well, but it's more for the sake of making it look extremely dangerous. See, if we can make Islam look dangerous, that will be able to apply to all religion, and we can call all religion a harm to society. That is a fallacy of composition, claiming that something that's true for the part is true for the whole. If this thing says it believes in God and it's dangerous, anything that says it believes in God must also be dangerous. Could we also apply that to atheistic communism? Anything that tries to get God out of the equation is inherently dangerous too. It's the same game. If that's his objective, what's his method? Well, he gets interviews with influential Christians and others. He has loaded questions and mocking replies on hand, and he claims that he is on a spiritual journey in order to try to get honest interviews. So this is a tactic of some of this mock journalism. You can actually take bits out of the interview and apply those words to a different location and make it sound like they're responding to a question differently than maybe they actually did. I remember Matt Slick several years back got invited to participate on The Daily Show, and he was very hesitant at first, but he wound up participating, and it's because they pretty well bold-faced lied about what it was going to be about. They said this is one of the rare occasions they're doing an actual serious bit of documentary, and that they would not use the material to try to shame his position, but they would try to represent it accurately. Well, that was quite the lie, and it was a convenient lie to just get him to participate. And so he had some inside information, and Matt Slick actually had the raw recording himself, and he put that on his website so you could see the difference between how the interview actually went and how they spliced together bits of the interview to make him sound ridiculous or stupid or even perverse. So that's something that probably takes place in Religulous. It's a dishonest way to gain interviews, and it's a dishonest way of editing interviews. Now, there's some errors of information in the film. Let's get into some of the content of this. You have Francis Collins, one of the smartest men in the biological sciences, and he's also a believer. So Collins says that evidence for Christ's existence is overwhelming. This kind of seems like the duh statement of the day. Maher says, what evidence? I've never even heard anyone propose that there's evidence. Goes on to say, you know that the New Testament writers weren't eyewitnesses. And then he says, the only records we have are Gospels. Gospels are not history. Why? Because the Gospel writers supposedly never met Jesus. This is kind of strange, and maybe Collins went ahead and corrected him. I think if he was talking with a biblical scholar or even a non-Christian biblical scholar, he would probably laugh Maher right out of the room. But if you're doing your own movie with your own camera crew, you can get away with some of this stuff. Collins is right. The evidence for Christ's existence is overwhelming. What evidence? What evidence can you expect from history? DNA evidence? Probably not. Recorded evidence? Oh yeah. And what about a traceable line from that person's existence to the way things are now? So multiple things wrong with what he's saying here. New Testament writers weren't eyewitnesses? Yes, they were. Church fathers referred to the gospel writers as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Mark was an eyewitness and was the traveling companion and the writer of the eyewitness evidence that Peter had. Matthew was a disciple, an eyewitness. Luke may or may not have been an eyewitness. I think he probably lived nearby, maybe had very limited eyewitness testimony, but he got direct stories from the eyewitnesses and jotted those down. And of course, John was an eyewitness, lived in very close relationship with Jesus. So he's just not telling the truth about that one. He says the only records we have are the Gospels. Is that really the only evidence we have of Jesus living is the Gospels? There is actually more evidence. See Josh McDowell for more information on that. Gary Habermas would be another. And they cite the guys like Tacitus, Suetonius, Pliny the Younger, and Josephus, who refer to Christ. It's odd that these secular historians, even anti-Christian historians in some cases, would refer to a non-existent person. Furthermore, Paul the Apostle is an eyewitness, Peter, the author of Peter, Jude, the author of Jude, whoever wrote Hebrews, and James is an eyewitness. And you have eyewitnesses present at the time of the authoring of the New Testament. They could say, no, it didn't happen the way that they said. So if you don't believe that there's eyewitnesses to the biblical events, you have a lot of explaining to do regarding how in the world a movement started surrounding the resurrection of Jesus in the very location where those events were said to take place. He says that Gospels are not history? Where does he come off saying that? Because they have religious interest in them, they're not history? Well, that's strange. That's like saying that the history of the founding of America is not history because it has an interest in promoting patriotism of America. Just because there's an interest in the thing, that makes it not history? Maybe that's why the Gospels were recorded, because it is significant history. It's life-changing history. So at a time when not a whole lot of writing was going on, several people saw fit to jot down information about this. Homosexuality becomes a big deal in this film. Won't get too into that. It's kind of a play on emotion. I do need to get into something on that, because I think there's misinformation there also. Part of the crux of their argument is whether nature dictates whether a person's gay or not. Maher says that there's a gay gene. The other man says, well, nature does not show that there's a gay gene. He did get a clip of someone claiming there's a gay gene. I really don't think there's anything to that. Seen something in my email inbox recently, or maybe it was on MSN or something, and it said they cannot find a gay gene. But even if there were tendencies don't make something right. Sometimes you have tendencies because you need to fight against them. I was interested in his interview with Ken Ham also. He went over to Ham's Creation Museum. A decent little interview with Ham, and it's so choppy you really can't tell what the interview was like. But some more misinformation that Maher has here. He acts as though the conservative or majority Christian position is that the earth is 5,000 years old. And I don't even know if that's the majority position, that the earth is young. But the number is also off. I don't know of any Christian that claims that the earth is 5,000 years old. If you take the genealogies back, you exceed 5,000 years. You have a flood approximately 4,400 years ago. If you take all the genealogies with no gaps, and then you have Adam and Eve just over 6,000 years ago, if that's the case. But 5,000, don't know where he got that number. He gets a little mocking in the Ham part, and no surprise, he does that throughout the whole film. And he compares dinosaurs coexisting with man to the Flintstones. Are you as ridiculous as the Flintstones? You better not be. Better give up this Bible stuff. Well, first of all, I don't know if it's required to believe in the dinosaur-man coexistence, but that aside, I've also been to a place near Arches in Utah where there's dinosaur prints, and what they often don't tell you is dinosaur prints and human prints are often in the same soil. There's even been human prints inside muddy dinosaur prints. So did humans and dinosaurs coexist? Maybe. I can't say definitively. There's a scientific consensus, says Maher. He says that 93% of scientists, at least in some certain academy, favor kind of a naturalistic evolution perspective. But what evidence is that? Maybe 93% of the scientists that Ken Ham includes believe in a young Earth. You'd say, yeah, well, Ken Ham is selecting the scientists to work in favor with his interests. Right. So is it possible that these scientific agencies are selecting scientists that work hand in hand with their interests too? After this, there was a person referring to the dating of the authorship of the Bible as ranging from 2000 BC to 200 AD. But if you take the writings of Moses as the first writings, you've got about 1400s BC, and the Bible certainly was finished before 200 AD. You have a bunch of Gnostic Gospels getting written around that time, but the book of Revelation was probably last, and it's at the latest mid-90s AD, so stretching it out too far there. Here's an interesting statement that Maher made. He said, you can't be sure of heaven. He believes that this desire for heaven or the desire of the avoidance of hell is what drives religion forward. I don't say believe in God so that you can avoid getting your flesh charred on your way to an eternal death. I think that's a poor motivation. But Maher assumes that Christians just have this fear of hell, desire for heaven thing, and that's really the only way that religion can get moving. And by the way, yes, the hope of heaven is amazing. The resurrection of Jesus kind of cements the hope of heaven. But I'd still be doing what I'm doing if I was certain that I did not go to heaven when I died. Because you can still ask, like I said, does God exist? What does he deserve from you? He still deserves your worship and your acknowledgement. And he's still the most fascinating concept in philosophy, the highest thought of mankind. He still deserves everything from me, even if I had no hope of heaven. And then he says, to all Christians, you can't be sure. Why? Because, and this is a quote, because I don't know, and you do not possess mental powers that I do not. That's funny, because he kind of claims to possess mental powers that the religious don't have, the power to think freely and openly. But he also says that nobody with a belief in God can possibly possess a mental power that he does not have. He assumes that since he doubts, everybody must be a doubter. How does that work with the Grand Canyon? If I explain something to somebody, maybe they're from another country and they've never heard of the Grand Canyon, I say there's a canyon in Arizona, just about 5 hours away. It's a mile deep. It's up to 10 miles across in places. It's got a little river at the bottom of it. It's very colorful. And they say, that sounds kind of crazy. How could something like that exist in a place of the country like this? If you're so sure of the existence of this canyon, where's your proof? If you're so sure of the existence of this canyon, then I should be sure of it too. To this, I would respond, all right, come with me. Let's go to it. And to the seekers, I make that same invitation. If I claim to have seen something extremely beautiful that you haven't yet seen, that may or may not be arrogant. There's a humble way to do that. But I would say to you, all right, why don't you come join me? Let's see it. The desire that some people have to avoid gazing upon a beautiful thing is staggering. They're afraid that they're going to have to give something up. And that's probably true. When you experience something truly beautiful, sometimes you walk away changed. Sometimes you're never the same. Sometimes it influences the way that you live the rest of your life. Some people are afraid to gaze upon beauty because they see how different people can be from experiencing it. Now, back to Bill Maher, and I would assume he's afraid to gaze upon ultimate beauty because he makes a great living insulting it. Here's a summary, I think, of what he's been doing. Whether this was an atheist putting down Christians and other people of faith, or whether it would be Christians mocking atheists or people of other faiths, this approach is a big barrier to honest inquiry. People celebrate Maher in the reviews because they think he does a good job of confronting the status quo and inspiring people to question commonly held views, but any potential benefit of inquiry and open-mindedness is removed by technique. Thanks to this, a generation is more encouraged to insult without honest inquiry, or to use sarcasm without research. And this is perpetuating this generation of shallow thinkers that use memes or Twitter or a YouTube comment to perpetuate their atheism. This is not solid thinking. This is not how you think well about the things that matter most. If you want to think well about the Christian worldview, or any other worldview, make an honest inquiry about it. Don't begin by mocking. Don't begin by insulting or trying to make yourself look good through comedy and put-downs. Hopefully people can see this, and they can say that just because something is comedic does not mean it's perpetuating an accurate worldview. Just because it's insulting and mocking doesn't mean that it represents ultimate truth. We should be better than this. Bill Maher should be better than this. And maybe he is better than this, but maybe this is just his way of selling movies and selling tickets. Through Maher's technique, people are also taught to dehumanize. And this is maybe the most serious consequence. You look at somebody who's interviewed on the movie and they become dehumanized. They're an object of scrutiny, an object of mockery. They're not viewed as human. They're not viewed as a person who can think for themselves, who has good ideas, who's a loving parent. They're taught to dehumanize the person, to use them instrumentally as a person only useful for comedic purposes, and to make the comedian look good. This film also teaches people to be sexually obsessed. The number of sexual references was pretty staggering. It even teaches to regard their evaluation of religion in terms of sexuality, perpetuating something that humans crave anyway, and often crave in a misguided way, and that God could only be an invention to scare people away from these desires. And I think that's where it goes beyond lacking a conviction that God exists to an active despising of the existence of God, because people have their idea of what right and wrong is, of what their morality should look like, and they would hate to have any sort of authority reign on their parade. And you may see it not just in terms of the existence of God, you may see it in the presence of other authorities. What do they think of the police, for instance? What do they think of their principal, or the president of their college, or a professor, or a parent, or an older friend, or a manager at a store? Authority figures abound. And I would wager that there is a problem with authority because of the desire to perpetuate one's own view of what's right and wrong, because they found temporary pleasure in an area that they're afraid would be squelched if they came to admit that God exists and deserves something from us. So again, that is the way that I drive the discussion forward. Not in a mocking tone, but with honest inquiry regarding the question, if God exists, what would he deserve from you? If you knew that God existed, would you submit to that idea? If you could know that he exists, would you pursue that? I'm not saying anything about making money for my church, joining our party, writing me love letters, or frankly making me feel good because you complimented me for sharing something meaningful. Whatever. But the question, if God exists, would you pursue knowledge of that? Would you be open to it? Would you yield to it? Would you be ready? The evidence is out there. You can go re-listen to the cosmological proof of God from a couple weeks ago. What do you do with that? Put the mocking out of your head. Put the sexual expletives out of your head. And think well about the things that matter most. And what matters most? Is God real? Because that defines your existence. And if he's real, what does he deserve from you? It's a question that should have us pressing into this concept tirelessly. What does our existence mean? If God exists, that affirms the conviction that this really means something. Alright folks, again, happy Labor Day. I look forward to seeing some of you out on campus or here at the Christian Student Center. This is Evan Van Skull for the Curious Minds podcast. You never know what we're going to talk about next time, but until then, may God bless and guide you.